I want you to sit back for a moment and listen to your feet. It sounds like a strange request, doesn't it? But for many of you, your feet have been trying to tell you a story for years. Perhaps it's a faint buzzing, like a distant swarm of bees. Or maybe it's a coldness that won't go away, even under heavy wool blankets. You tell yourself it's just the cold, or perhaps you're just getting older. But in my 45 years of clinical practice, I've learned one haunting truth. The body whispers long before it screams. By the time that whisper turns into a burning fire or a terrifying numbness, your functional reserve, that hidden battery of health you've been drawing from since your youth, is running dangerously low. There's a silent tragedy unfolding in living rooms across the country. I call it the retirement tragedy. It's the heartbreaking moment when a man or woman finally reaches the finish line of a long career, ready to travel and play with grandchildren, only to find they have to spend their hard-earned wealth just to buy back the mobility that was stolen by decades of small, quiet negligences. Your nerves aren't simply old. In many cases, they are starving. They are suffocating in a sea of inflammation, stripped of their insulation, and crying out for a very specific type of fuel. Today, we are going to look at the invisible sign that most doctors miss, a common digestive habit that might be starving your nervous system even if you eat the finest steaks and eggs. We will reveal the one kitchen habit, a simple oil swap, that can reduce nerve inflammation by approximately 30%. And most importantly, we will explore why ignoring that mild tingling today is a gamble that leads to an irreversible loss of balance in less than a decade. Imagine your nerves as electrical wires that have lost their protective tape. Today, I am going to show you how to rewrap them. Hello, and welcome back to the Senior Health Doctor. In today's video, we will cover how certain comfort foods can actually repair and protect your aging nerves. Before we start, if you enjoy our content, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me your age and which city or country you are watching from. To understand how to fix a nerve, we must first understand how we break one. It is a process I call the chain of decay, and it begins long before you feel a single spark of pain. We start at the mechanical and cellular level. Every nerve in your body, from the thick sciatic nerve to the tiny fibers in your fingertips, is wrapped in a fatty substance called myelin. Think of myelin as the high-grade insulation on a copper wire. Its job is to ensure the electrical signal travels at lightning speed. But this insulation is living tissue. It requires constant maintenance. When we flood our systems with high glycemic comfort foods, the refined flours and hidden sugars, we initiate a mechanical error known as glycation. In the clinical world, we track this through advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. Literally, the sugar in your blood begins to caramelize the proteins in your nerves. This isn't a metaphor, it is a chemical reality. This sugar crust makes the nerve sheath brittle. It creates cellular stress, triggering a cascade of pro-inflammatory cytokines that turn the environment around your nerves acidic and toxic. But the damage doesn't stop with the insulation. This is where the vascular system enters the tragedy. Most people don't realize that nerves have their own private blood supply, a delicate network of microscopic vessels called the vasa nervorum. These are the vessels of the vessels. When chronic inflammation and sugar crust take hold, these tiny pipes begin to narrow. This is nerve ischemia, slow-motion suffocation. Without a constant flow of oxygenated blood, the nerve cannot produce the energy it needs to maintain the myelin. As the perfusion compromise worsens, the structural collapse begins. The insulation thins, and the electrical signal starts to leak. This is the biological origin of that invisible sign we discussed the moment your nerves begin to starve because they can no longer receive the nutrients they need from your blood. When the signal leaks into the surrounding tissue, your brain interprets it as a phantom sensation. That is the tingling. That is the buzzing. It is the sound of a short circuit. If this continues, the functional collapse becomes total. The nerve fibers themselves, the axons, begin to retract and die back, a process called dying back neuropathy. It starts at the furthest points, the toes and fingers, and slowly marches toward the spine. This is why you must never ignore a mild tingling. It is the first stage of a structural wall crumbling. Now, consider the chemical environment. In many seniors, this decay is accelerated by an unlikely culprit, the stomach. As we age, our production of stomach acid naturally declines, or we suppress it with medications for heartburn. This stops the production of something called intrinsic factor. Without it, your body cannot unlock vitamin B12 from your food. You could be eating the most expensive grass-fed beef in the world, but if your stomach cannot harvest the B12, your nerves remain in a state of famine. This is the digestive habit that starves the nerve. B12 is the primary raw material for myelin repair. Without it, the tape on your wires cannot be replaced, no matter how much you rest. This leads to a state of chronic microedema within the nerve bundle. The nerves swell, but they are trapped within tight tunnels of fascia and bone. This internal pressure further cuts off the microcirculation, creating a closed loop of destruction. No nutrients, no oxygen, more swelling, less blood. It is a slow, downward spiral toward the retirement tragedy, where balance is lost because the brain can no longer feel where the feet are on the floor. We must also look at the role of oxidative stress. When the nerve's mitochondria, the power plants of the cell, are forced to process high levels of glucose without enough protective antioxidants, like alpha-lipoic acid or benfotiamine, they produce exhaust in the form of free radical. This exhaust eats away at the nerve from the inside out. This is why we say that absence of pain is not health. You might not feel the burn yet, but the cellular exhaust is already corroding the engine. However, there's a silver lining in the way the body is built. The body is remarkably resilient if provided with the correct biological building blocks. We can intervene in this chain of decay by manipulating the inflammatory environment and restoring the microcirculation. By introducing specific fat-soluble vitamins and changing the fatty acid profile of our diet, we can begin to suppress the cytokine storm and provide the raw materials for remyelination. We can actually help the tape grow back, provided the wire hasn't been completely severed. The simple one habit of an oil swap, moving away from pro-inflammatory seed oils that contain high levels of omega-6 can begin to shift the chemical environment from one of fire to one of repair. When you replace those with stable, neuroprotective fats, you are essentially changing the quality of the grease in your cellular machinery. But as we look at these clinical mechanisms, I am reminded that medicine is never just about pathways and molecules. It is about the people who have to live through the collapse. I remember a patient of mine, a retired carpenter named Elias, whose hands began to fail him just as he started his final masterpiece. Elias was a man who had spent 50 years speaking through his hands. He was a master carpenter, the kind of craftsman who could feel a fraction of a millimeter's deviation in a piece of oak just by brushing his thumb across the grain. But when he came to see me in the twilight of his career, those hands as instruments of precision had become heavy, clumsy strangers. He described a sensation that I've heard 1,000 times in the clinic. It felt as if he were wearing thick, invisible gloves. He would reach for a chisel and knock it off the bench because his brain was receiving a delayed, distorted signal of where his fingers actually were. The tragedy of Elias wasn't just the loss of his hobby, it was the erosion of his identity. He was experiencing the retirement tragedy in real time. He had the time, he had the wood, and he had the vision, but the biological machinery had been sabotaged by decades of comfort, eating too many sugary pastries with his morning coffee, and a reliance on cheap, inflammatory vegetable oils that had slowly turned his internal environment into a rusted-out factory. His nerves were suffering from the caramelization we spoke of earlier. The sugar crust had become so thick that the electrical impulses were struggling to penetrate the noise of inflammation. Then there was Martha. Martha didn't have hand problems, she had the bees. That's how she described the relentless buzzing in her feet that kept her pacing the floor. At 3 a.m., for Martha, the invisible sign was her long-term use of acid blockers for a sour stomach. She didn't realize that by silencing her heartburn, She had effectively silenced her nerve repair system. Her stomach had stopped producing the intrinsic factor necessary to harvest vitamin B12. While she thought she was treating a minor inconvenience, she was actually presiding over the slow starvation of her sciatic nerve. Her B's were the sound of her nerves dying for lack of fuel. To help Elias and Martha, and perhaps to help you, we have to implement a rescue protocol that addresses the chain of decay at every level. This isn't a miracle cure. It is a systematic reconstruction of your functional reserve. The first step in our protocol is the oil swap. We must immediately cease the introduction of high omega-6 seed oils, soybean, corn, and cottonseed oils, which act like kindling for the inflammatory fire surrounding your nerves. These oils integrate into the very membranes of your nerve cells, making them stiff and prone to oxidative rupture. We replace them with stable, neuroprotective fats like extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil. This simple habit shift can reduce the chemical noise in the nerve environment by approximately 30%, allowing the faint signals of healing to finally be heard. Step 2 is the B-complex resurrection. Because the invisible sign of low stomach acid is so prevalent, we cannot rely on standard digestion alone. We look toward benfotiamine, a fat-soluble form of vitamin B1. Unlike standard thiamine, which often washes out of the system before it can do its work, benfotiamine can actually penetrate the fatty shield of the nerve cell. Once inside, it acts as a powerful antioxidant, breaking down the sugar crust of glycation. We pair this with methylcobalamin, the active form of B12, which bypasses the need for complex stomach processing. This provides the tape for your wires, allowing the myelin sheath to begin its slow, arduous process of reinsulation. Step 3 is the microvascular flush. We must reopen the vasa nervorum, those tiny, suffocating blood vessels. We do this by introducing alpha-lipoic acid, often found in leafy greens and organ meats, which has been shown in clinical reviews to improve endoneurial blood flow. We also look at hydration and electrolyte balance. Without enough potassium and magnesium, the sodium-potassium pump that powers every nerve impulse will stall. Imagine a car trying to run with a clogged fuel line. That is a nerve without electrolytes. Magnesium, in particular, acts as a gatekeeper in the spinal cord, dampening the pain signals so your brain isn't constantly flooded with the burning sensation. Finally, we must address the nerve gliding. Nerves are designed to slide through your muscles and fascia like silk ribbons, but chronic inflammation makes them sticky. Through gentle, specific movements, which we call nerve flossing, we can physically pump the edema and toxic fluids out of the nerve bundle, allowing fresh, nutrient-rich blood to take its place. It is a process of imbibition, literally sucking life back into the tissue. As Elias began this protocol, the change wasn't overnight. Regeneration is a game of millimeters. In the human body, a damaged nerve can only grow back at a rate of about 1 inch per month. It requires a patience that our modern world rarely demands. But after several months, the invisible gloves began to thin. The feedback from his tools started to return. Martha's bees didn't disappear instantly, but they quieted from a swarm to a hum, and eventually to a silence that allowed her to sleep through the night for the first time in years. However, even with the best nutritional protocol, there are moments where the body's whispers turn into a shout that cannot be ignored. In my decades of wearing the white coat, I have sat across from thousands of patients who reached this stage of the conversation and asked the same 3 questions. They are questions born of a mixture of hope and a very rational fear. The first is often, "Dr. Arthur, can I just buy a better mattress or different shoes to stop this?" It is a common instinct to look for an external solution to an internal collapse. While a supportive mattress can prevent further mechanical compression of the spine, and wide toe box shoes can stop the pinching of the metatarsal nerves, they are merely stagehands in this drama. You cannot cushion your way out of a nutritional famine. If the vasa nervorum are choked by glycation and the myelin is stripped, the most expensive bed in the world won't stop the bees from buzzing in your feet. The second question is more somber. Is the damage permanent? This is where we must be honest about the functional reserve. If a nerve cell body dies, what we call necrosis, it is gone. We cannot resurrect the dead. However, many seniors are not suffering from dead nerves, but from stunned or starving nerves. If the axon is still intact, the insulation can be repaired. The conduction can be restored, but the window of opportunity does not stay open forever. Once the dying back reaches the spinal cord, the door to recovery often slams shut. Lastly, I am asked, why didn't my other doctors tell me about the oil swap or the stomach acid connection? The answer is the chain of decay. Modern medicine is often a fire department. It excels at putting out the screaming fires of acute crisis, but it is less equipped to handle the decades of whispering negligence. A pill may mask the burning sensation, but it does not provide the methylcobalamin needed to rebuild the sheath. I must leave you with a stern word of caution. While we have discussed the power of neuroprotective nutrition, there are red flags that no amount of bone broth or B vitamins can fix. If you experience a sudden loss of strength, what we call drop foot, or if you lose control of your bowel or bladder, you are not in a nutritional crisis. You are in a surgical emergency. You must seek the emergency room immediately. Furthermore, if you are currently on medications like gabapentin or pregabalin, do not adjust your dosage based on this video. These chemicals alter your brain's perception of pain, and stopping them abruptly can cause a neurological rebound that is agonizing. Always work with your personal physician. And for those of you considering new supplements, watch your body closely. If you develop a rash, heart palpitations, or if your symptoms worsen, stop immediately. Your body is a unique chemical laboratory, and what heals one may irritate another. We have spent our time today discussing the comfort food approach, but make no mistake, this is a rescue mission. Your mobility is the currency of your independence. Without it, your retirement becomes a confined space. Do not let the retirement tragedy be your story. Your nerves are reaching out for the building blocks of life: the B vitamins, the healthy fats, the stable blood sugar, and they are waiting for you to provide them. Health is not a permanent gift. It is a depreciating asset that requires constant reinvestment. The tragedy is not that we get old. The tragedy is that we realize the value of the battery only when the light begins to flicker and fade. Don't wait to lose your health to realize its value.